Take me back to your own childhood and how you grew up, where you grew up, and let's start exploring from the earliest memories that you have.
I was born in Leicester, in the Midlands, and I was raised in a town called Loughborough. It's quite a small town, around 15 minutes away from Leicester. And I spent most of my childhood life growing up there. I was born to Iranian parents who moved across from Iran. I spent most of my childhood life in Loughborough, went to school there. Yeah, I had a really amazing childhood. It was full of play and creativity. I think I had an incredible childhood.
And what was that home environment like? Because you said you were born to Iranian parents. How was it navigating between being, a British guy from Leicester versus an Iranian family household?
My dad actually moved over from Iran in 1975. He came to the UK to study English, and it was never his intention to actually stay in the UK at that point. He came after he did his military service, because in Iran you have to do 2 years military service. He saved enough money to come over to the UK to study English, and then his intention was to go back to Iran and continue his studies there. And at that point, Iran was quite a prosperous country, oil and gas rich country, and the quality of life was actually better in Iran than in the UK. My dad was saying houses were more expensive in Tehran than the UK. So things were good there. He said people would travel to the UK for holidays, really. It wasn't really a destination people were looking to leave Iran for. And people didn't really see the reason of leaving Iran at that point. And when he moved here, his quality of life wasn't as good. And people used to think that he was rich because he was from Iran. I think the stereotypes have changed a little bit now, but when he would say that he was from Iran, people would think he's really wealthy. And he would mention that he owned a TV and had a fridge and freezer back home, and people would think, yeah, he's really rich, because back then, apparently, you had to rent a lot of these things in the UK. Not everyone had the privilege of having all these appliances. So, yeah, that was basically my dad's story. He came over and then decided to end up studying here. His parents were like, now that you're here, you might as well study here and go to university here. So he ended up going to university in the UK and did his PhD in Loughborough, actually, and then ended up working at Loughborough University. But then he met my mum in Dubai and was going back to Iran to get married to her, came back to the UK, and we just ended up staying here. So that was my parents' story, really. And we did go to Iran for a short amount of time when I was younger.
When your dad came, do you know if it was quite common that people would come and, was the reasons normally to study English, or was he more an exception?
I think the mindset behind it was that you'd come here, you'd study English, and then you can go back and probably get a better job back home.
Yeah.
So that was the main reason. But like I said, a lot of people wouldn't actually leave at that point. There wasn't really a reason to leave. Things were good where they were, and they would just come for holidays, really.
I find that quite interesting. It's actually really nice to hear that it was good, like even slightly different sort of era, but when my dad talks about growing up in East Africa and he said that life there was like a paradise, and he also came here kind of for job reasons and English. But and again, my history of Iran could be very, flawed, but wasn't it in the 70s, or was it not yet, when there was kind of this unease with the public because, I think it was under the ruling of the Shah or something, so basically controlled by like US and UK and very influenced. So wasn't there already a bit of tension and unease then, or was that more to the late 70s?
Yeah, I think there was around that time, but yeah, I think it was towards the late 70s because it was really 1979 where that government was overthrown and the new government came in. But at that point, it just made more sense to stay in the UK because they made the decision that if they stay in the UK, my brother and myself will have a better future. And that's when they really sacrificed everything they had for myself and my brother. I think one of the key pivotal moments was that, yeah, we can go back to Iran and we can have a good quality of life, but what does the future look like for our kids?
Do you feel that you identified more as a British, or kind of would you sort of express yourself as, like a British Iranian?
This is a tough one actually, because I think growing up as well, I've had a bit of a identity crisis or identity clash, because I was born and raised here, so I identify myself as being British, but sometimes you get the sense that other people may not think you're British just because of the way you look. And then when I'm in Iran, and I actually lived in Iran for a year when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I actually went to nursery school there. And obviously I was different to most of the other kids because I couldn't speak Farsi as well as them because I was born in the UK. So I already felt like I wasn't an Iranian, even though I have Iranian parents and I was in Iran in school. I felt like the odd kid in the classroom. I really didn't enjoy going to school there because, yeah, I was just the odd one out. So in a sense, when I'm in Iran, I don't feel Iranian, and I don't think my family think I'm Iranian because they'll say, yeah, he's a foreigner, And when I'm in the UK, I think a lot of people may not know I'm British. So you're just in between two worlds, really.
And so moving kind of to the next stage, how did that progress in terms of, were you able to kind of resonate and identify with your own identity and self as time went on, or was it kind of always a challenge throughout your childhood and youth?
Yeah, I think growing up, I wasn't really that proud to be Iranian, especially when it came to speaking Farsi in public. I remember I would be in the supermarket with my mum and she'd be speaking Farsi to me, and I'll tell her to speak in English because I didn't want people to hear that she's speaking to me in another language. So there was a period in my childhood where I wasn't that proud to be Iranian. And I think as I grew older and I read up on all the history and I started to become more proud of my heritage and started to speak Farsi openly, and I actually started to embrace knowing another language, which a lot of people don't have the privilege of being able to speak fluently in 2 languages. So I started to see that as a extra skill and started to really embrace it. So it did change over the years. But I think when you're younger, especially during the period of like after 9/11, there might be like increased tension around speaking Middle Eastern languages. So I think that also plays in the back of your mind. I think there was increased tension around that time, and you didn't want to maybe flaunt it in public. But my opinion's changed now. I just embrace it, and I'm comfortable with my heritage. I'm proud of it.
Okay, so you say being proud of your heritage, and it reminds me actually that in secondary school, my best friend was Iranian, and so I'll go to his house a lot. And firstly, yeah, the food is amazing, but Iranians really like sour food. I think you have this like fruit bar, it's like flat and it's very sour.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
And he used to always have that, and I didn't mind it, but it was also very sour. But I love the food, and so what are your kind of tastes, and do you like the kind of food of your background?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love the food. I think it's one of the key things in our culture, I think, that brings us all together. It's really the food. Like, we put a lot of effort and love into the food we make, and lots of different flavors, different spices. I think that is one of the key things in our culture, and a lot of friends that have tried the Iranian food, I don't know one single person that hasn't enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. It's amazing. And so tell me, what would a typical Iranian get-together with your family be like?
Yeah, it's good times. It's full of singing and dancing and laughing and eating, drinking. It's just a party, and everyone's just having a good time. Just in the presence of being with each other is just like the best feeling ever.
And does it ever get very, I don't know, like heated in like a political sense? You know, do they ever kind of talk about Iranian politics and maybe a clash of beliefs and views on certain things?
No, I've not experienced it. I think that's something we don't really talk about much, to be honest. It's not something we discuss that often.
And the reason that I ask is because, and again, I'd love to hear your perspectives on this, but you know, I was looking it up, and when you're going years back, and you know, Zoroastrianism, and it was really interesting to hear about how that Persian community and belief system, and then when you compared it to the Greek way of living, and you know, obviously the story of 300 and all of that, and the kind of taking over. So you know, that Greek belief system kind of took precedence. But at one point, that Persian belief system was so strong, and it was a lot more open and expressive in terms of Greeks were still about slaves and, you know, men being the dominant over the women, and that kind of way that carried on for years. But that Persian belief system, going from Zoroastrianism, was very much about express your own beliefs and your own way of thinking. And so it's good to see in some way. Do you think that is why, like you say, when Iranians get together, they still have that very open and accepting and just about, you know, enjoying and not imposing certain ways of thinking or beliefs on other people?
Yeah, definitely. So Zoroastrianism, I think it's the first ever religion, goes back thousands of years. And it's just crazy how forward thinking they were at that point to, you know, like you mentioned, really promote open thinking and make your own choices and not impose anything on you. You could actually have different faiths, you can believe in different things, but you wouldn't get scrutinized for it. Yeah, just how advanced they were at that time to have these kind of beliefs. It's amazing how people were thinking in those ways at that time, and I think it's a shame how even with Persian culture, it's not really publicized as much, even though we did do a lot of great things. A lot of great things came from Persia that a lot of people don't really know about because it's not in the media as much, and it doesn't get the credit it deserves a lot of the time. You just look at, for example, 300, and Hollywood tried to make, you know, the Greeks look really good, and the Persians, they make them look like savages and make them look like horrible people with the way they portrayed them. And even in school, we didn't learn about the Persian Empire, which was one of the biggest empires in the world, but we learn about the Greeks, the Romans, the Vikings. We learn about the monarchy and the Victorians,
and Vatican and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a big chunk of history that's missed, that I don't know why we don't hear about it, but I think it is core to the way of life today. A lot of the teachings are true to the world we live in today.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy to think that because of what happened at that time where kind of the Greek army won that battle and it really started the kind of growth of that empire. But imagine if it wasn't that way around, the whole history would have been rewritten, and who knows what things would have been like. Like we've discussed, that their practices were a lot more favorable to kind of humankind as a whole. So you might not have seen all this slavery, and definitely, like you say, what we'd have learned in history probably would have been very different. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. And so that kind of sort of open belief system, do you think that's really helped you to go on this own voyage that you've been on to find your purpose or your own mission is in life?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's also a lot of the teachings from our parents as well, is just to be humble, be kind. They always look out for their friends and family and don't really expect anything in return. Also, I think part of why I might be so driven and hungry is that when I was growing up, I would ask for things, and my parents would always say inshallah, which in translation from Arabic to English means God willing.
Yeah.
So I'd ask for something, mom, can I have this, dad, can I have this, and they'll say inshallah, and I kept saying it, and they kept saying inshallah, and I was like, hold on, you're saying inshallah, but I'm not getting any of these things, so yeah. Does that actually mean no? So that taught me a lesson, is that I shouldn't just ask for things, things won't just fall on your lap just because you're asking for it. So that changed my mindset, that from a young age that I need to go get it. If I want something, don't just sit there and ask for it, just do something about it. So I think that kind of mindset was ingrained into me early on, and I was a bit of a hustler in school as well. So the playground was my marketplace. I remember I would go around buying and selling phones in the playground. I'll buy phones that were broken, maybe with a broken screen, and I'll go buy the screen off eBay. I'll fit it myself and then sell it for an increased price. Or one time I was sent to the head teacher's office because I was making a list of people who wanted to buy a certain phone because I wanted to go buy it in bulk. So I was taking the names down of all the students who were interested in this phone, and that list got into the hands of the head teacher and got sent into the office because I basically wanted to guarantee that 10, 20 students would buy this phone so I could place an order. So I did have that kind of drive early on as a child.
Why do you think that was? Because I know a lot of people will do this because their home environment is very financially restricted, right? So they're I need to find ways of making money, and then through necessity breeds innovation, right? So then people start thinking how can I get this money? For you, was it about hey, I need this money, or was it just the idea of I want to be creative and do something?
Yeah, I think it was more about just being financially independent and not relying on others to get things you want. And it's not like my parents didn't give me anything, don't get me wrong. I did have most things. I wasn't short on anything. So what my parents gave me was amazing. What they gave me in terms of the time they spent with myself and my brother, I think I can never repay them for that, because at one point I had a private tennis coach. I was going to football, I was doing swimming, I was doing basketball, and they were paying monthly for a lot of these things. And it wasn't like my parents were that well off, but they still managed to support myself and my brother with a lot of those things, particularly around sport. And tennis is an expensive sport. I mean, you've got the private coaching sessions are quite expensive, the rackets and changing the strings every time you break your strings. So what they gave myself and my brother in terms of the time and the investment was just incredible. And knowing that we're probably not going to make it pro, and this is something that I've only reflected on recently, is why did they spend all that money on us and they didn't really spend anything on themselves? Why did they spend it on us, knowing that we're not going to make it pro? What's the point? And I think they just got enjoyment out of seeing us grow, and I think they knew we'd get some leadership skills out of it that you won't necessarily learn in school. They gave a lot in terms of investing into myself and my brother. Even like my dad would drive us hours to go play in tennis tournaments, and I was losing the first round. He's just driven us hours just to drive all the way back home, and that didn't stop him from continuing to enter us into tournaments. And even when we were playing football, you know, they were always supporting us no matter what the weather, whether it was raining, snowing, or really windy. They were always there to support us. So in that sense, they gave us everything. But I think it was kind of that, I could kind of see that scarcity mindset as well, where for years I didn't think my parents were that ambitious. And I was thinking, I don't want to be like that. I want to be more driven. And I think part of it is that they focus all on my brother and myself rather than themselves. So would I say my parents reached their full potential on a personal level? I don't think they did. But did they reach it at a parent level? I think you could have done more as a parent. So I think they made that trade-off. But from what I could see in themselves personally, I thought they could have done more. And I think that's part of the trade-off when you are an immigrant, is that you've already made that leap. You've made a lot of sacrifices, and you're kind of building the foundation for your kids to go on and do more. And I think that's what has driven me to do more and to go after these things. And it's come from my parents, like, indirectly, so they didn't teach me that, but I just thought that, I want to be financially independent. And one of the key things actually was when my dad was made redundant working at the university. So it was kind of a wake-up call that, I need to step up my game and not be dependent on my parents. So that was another pivotal moment which shifted my mindset.
That's really powerful what you said about, did they, achieve their full potential on a personal level? Maybe not, but parent level. It's a really good way of phrasing it. And from what you were saying earlier, it really sounds like they gave you everything that you needed and that was good for you, but they didn't spoil you and just give you everything that you wanted. So when you were asking for things and they didn't give it to you and they said, inshallah, that was more, you want some nice to haves. But when it came to things like, tennis is good for you, it's sport, you're outdoors, you're keeping active, you're building your base in teamwork and interacting with others and all of that, then they would spend the money. So it's a really key differentiator. And I love how you've kind of separated and realized what they did. And it really does come from that kind of being the kid of an immigrant, where they really do put a lot in you, because sometimes to do the move they did, they've had to sacrifice a lot, and maybe they've missed out on years of being able to do what they wanted. So now it's like, I never got to, but I want my kids to, both enjoy, but really work hard and do well. But it's so interesting to hear it from your side and the way you phrased it, because it resonates a lot with me. So that's a powerful message.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of it is down to, like what you just mentioned, they haven't experienced it themselves, so they're kind of living the life they wanted to live through you, because you now have all those opportunities. which sometimes puts a bit of pressure on you as well. I can understand it. It's something that I've only come to grips with recently, is that for a while I was like, well, maybe they're not that driven, they're not that ambitious, and they're not like materialistic, they're not chasing for more, like why is that? And I didn't understand it for such a long time. And just over the past couple of years where I've been kind of raising my self-awareness and looking at a lot of these things, I've started to realize that maybe they know more than I think, because when I was growing up, for me it was all about fame and wealth and becoming really rich or famous. And now my perceptions have changed and it's more aligned with my parents' way of thinking. So you can grow up thinking, why are my parents not that driven, and they're not chasing more money and all these materialistic things, but then you have a lot of these moments where you're thinking, well, these things aren't even that important. I mean, they're just at ease and at peace with what they have, and they don't have any stress or worry, and their life is all about their kids doing well.
Yeah, as long as my kids are successful, then I've done my duty almost.